Hello students! Today we're going to be talking about the Dunn and Halonen book. We're going to be on chapter 4. In your math classes in elementary or middle or high school, you may have asked the question, well, what's all this for? When am I ever going to use this? And hopefully the teacher talked about it. That's kind of what this chapter is. What are the skills? What are the tools that we're hoping you're taking from these psychology courses, not just this one, but all of your psychology coursework. So, what are some of the purposes of your psychology coursework long term? What are some of the long term goals we are hoping you get from it, or the skills, the long term skills we hope you take from this? So, to begin, let's talk about a couple different ways that we learn. So, a couple different theories, there's many more than just this. If you go into a degree in, say, education, you'll learn a lot more, but here's a couple. So, content centered approaches really focus on delivering a lot of content to you. So, you see a picture here of a lecture hall. So, oftentimes I'm in some kind of room or a lecture hall delivering a lot of content to students. A lot of these videos are a lot of material just given to you, maybe books, maybe research papers. So that's a content centered approach, trying to get you all the information we can about a given topic. So there's a criticism of this method that sometimes you're just teaching to test people on these things. And there's a lot of research that shows the forgetting curve, for example. If you pack in a ton of information, but you're not really using it, you're not making it meaningful, it's not going to be remembered or as useful to that person long term. So you might do well on a test, maybe a week later after you've learned the material, but you might not remember it long term when it's relevant later on. So that's kind of one criticism of this, is that the learning might not endure. A benefit is that you're getting a lot of material across pretty quickly, especially with the science fields. So you take a general psychology class, you take a intro level physics class, an intro level chemistry class. You're getting a lot of material all in a really quick amount of time. To give you a taste of what the whole field looks like, obviously it can't go in too much depth, but it's giving you a big amount of content. And generally with the college system, the further you go along with your degrees, the more hands-on training you're going to get. So this leads us to the learning-centered approach. This is basically focused on helping build skills. So what kind of skills? Well, if you're thinking of going into therapy, it would be literal clinical skills. So how to talk to people, how to respond to questions when something comes up that's surprising to you, how do you actually respond to that? So the literal skills. So if we're talking about research, those are some of the skills we build in this class. So reading, taking in research, also what are types of research, how to understand research, things like that, how to write. Those are skills that we're hoping to give to you. So that's a learning-centered approach. So with this, you might not get as much content because you're spending so much time, say, working on how to write or working on those clinical skills. But hopefully those skills like writing and reading, or those clinical skills as an example, should endure. So you can kind of think of this as, it's not a perfect example, but delivering a bunch of content for this example, and then for the learning centered, you can think of that more as like an apprenticeship or something like that, where you're more hands-on with the material. So, thinking to your schooling here at Salt Lake Community College, which approach do you think you are getting? In this class, maybe consider some of your other classes. Do you think it's more content centered, learning centered? And then, what's the best one? So, obviously, in an online setting, that's kind of a rhetorical question, but the answer is essentially, well, both can be really beneficial for different things. So we do need to get a broad amount of information to students pretty quickly to understand if they want to go further in physics, chemistry, geology, psychology, whatever the field is. You need kind of a broad understanding to be able to then focus where you want to go within that sphere of learning. So with this, there's a couple different ways you can deliver this information, whether it's the content centered or learning centered. The Sage on the Stage is a little more focused on this content centered approach, like giving the information. So you could imagine this person, they've got a stage there, or in an in-person classroom, you might have a literal stage. Here in this video, it's essentially a stage. I'm delivering content about these slides to you, there's not much back and forth or individual training in this specific learning experience, you might have a whole class that's literally just all lecture, getting content delivered to you, and almost no back and forth. That's kind of the sage on the stage. Versus the guide on the side is talking about how you are expecting, well, as teachers, we're expecting students to do more of their own learning that might be on their own time, or we're giving them work to work step by step and build their skills and practice those skills. So we help teach them kind of like an apprenticeship. You would teach someone a skill, watch them try it out, give them feedback, watch them improve. So that kind of support could be individual. So it depends on how big the classes are those kinds of things. So with that being said, a lot of times in my classes, I try to mix these two together because there's some things that we cannot practice in actual hands-on ways at the level that students are, or with the ethical rules that are in place. So we can't actually train clinical skills like in these undergraduate classes, for example, but we can talk to them. We can talk about the content, we can explain things, even if you're not actually getting that hands-on practice until maybe something like an internship. But we can guide through the writing and reading process of research. So I can deliver content as well as guide that kind of material. So that's how we try to do our psychology classes. So with this, when you have teachers doing more of this guiding, this more step-by-step increasing scaffolding, so scaffolding skills and building those competencies, that's a high impact practice. And that's kind of a buzzword in research as well as outside of research, saying, hey, this is something that's been shown to work. So it's really good. But with that being said, both of these have their place. I tend to use both of them as well. There's some things that in any given class you might not have the time, you might not have the money to do this kind of individual learning on every single subject that you're going through, and that's okay. So focus in this class is a lot on research. Focus in another class might be on other skills and competencies. So hopefully in those classes you're getting more of that individual guidance and skill building and scaffolding for the various skills for those specific courses. All right, so these are the skills, these are the competencies that we hope you are gaining, we hope you are learning throughout your psychology coursework. So not just from this class, other classes might even do a couple of these things better. But these are some of the skills and competencies that we hope you gain as a student in psychology. So, vocabulary and basic knowledge of psych subjects. That's a pretty basic thing. You probably did a lot of this in general psych. Learning new words. What do they mean? What is working memory? Those kinds of things. So, understanding science and evaluation. This class deals a lot with that. So, working on what is science, how do we do science, what is evaluation. So with that, hopefully you have a better understanding and you can take that with you to understanding how we do science in every area of psychology. So with that, that helps you apply your knowledge of science in your decision making. And that decision making can be within psychology, say for writing a paper or a lit review, for example, or that can be for making decisions in your own life of which kind of medicine, like looking at the research on them. If your doctor gives you two options or something like that, you can have a little bit more knowledge and make better decisions knowing a little more about the science. I wonder if in the video you can hear my cats fighting behind me. They're not very happy with each other right now. So with that, also hopefully you're gaining the skill to be able to apply these psychology principles in your personal life, in your social life, and also with work. So we've talked about study skills. With that, study skills are really important, but you don't just use them in school. You can use those study skills when you're learning a new thing on the workforce. So you're starting a new job, there's a bunch of things to learn. You can use those same tips and tricks to learn those things and do well and retain more of that information. So that would be a really good idea. Also knowing things like how do people communicate well, that can help you in work environments. So there's a whole area of psychology as well, industrial organizational psychology, that kind of applies psych principles to making better, hopefully, making better workplaces. So also these psych principles, the things that we learn about how we do science, how we do evaluation, how people are treated of different groups, the research about how to do treatments for people with, say, ADHD. So that might help you make decisions in civic matters, if there's a relevant law or policy or something like that, as well as in your personal life of how to treat and interact with people. So that goes to, we also are training you to act ethically, to talk about the rules and standards within psychology, but also help encourage you to understand and be empathetic with people, to act ethically towards them. In most of your classes, we cover ethics in research, and you've probably had that repeated to you. You might have heard of the Milgram study multiple times, even before this class. So how to act ethically with humans. So with this, you're learning a lot of how to evaluate research and information. That's a big part of this class specifically, but other classes get to that too. You'll talk about developmental research in your development class. In general psych, you'll talk about tons of research. You'll touch on it really briefly in a general psych class. In your abnormal psych class, you'll talk about research on what's going on currently with diagnosing of disorders and classification of disorders and good treatments for disorders. So you'll be talking about that and be able to know how to understand that research and that information and be literate in it so you can make decisions and have opinions about that. So with this, a big skill that we're hoping you gain, not just from this class, but from many of the classes in the psychology department, are that we want you to be able to communicate in a lot of different modes with different audiences. So you see here, there's a person on a stage, they're speaking to people. That's one way you could communicate to an audience. So you're speaking, one speaker at the front of a room with an audience that is a whole big crowd of people. That's one way to do that. Another thing, I think I've got another slide as an example in a second. You might have a small group presenting something. You might have a smaller group that you're presenting to, a smaller audience. You might be talking one-on-one with someone, having a discussion with them. So hopefully the psych principles that you're learning, as well as the communication skills, the group projects that we do in our various psych classes, will help you do better with these things. So hopefully you get to be a better writer. You get to be a better speaker. You get to be better at presenting things through digital media, say things like infographics, PowerPoint presentations, those kinds of things. Because I'm sure many of you will be in a field where you'll be in a room kind of like this, having a meeting, having to communicate some ideas that you have, listen to ideas they have, come together to make decisions in that workplace. If you've not already had that kind of experience, I'm sure most of you will. So being able to communicate and apply the psych learning that we have is something we really want you to be able to take forward from these classes. Not just this class, but all your psych classes. So many jobs will require you to speak to different people of different literacy levels. So this might be all people that are at the same education level as you. They might be a higher education level as you. They might be middle school education level. They might literally be elementary school or kindergarten students. So depending on the kind of work you do, you might be talking with people of a lot of different literacy levels. So being able to communicate clearly with those groups is a skill we really want to help you gain and build on through these courses. So scaffolding that. So with that, also the help of recognizing, understanding, respecting, and fostering diversity can help as well. So kind of infusing that through all of these different components of communicating, of understanding research, understanding the history of psychology, the history of evaluation, and how we do research in psychology, treating people ethically. So that all goes into that as well. So these are some of the big kind of big picture skills that we hope you take from psychology classes. So I know this was a pretty quick chapter, but hopefully it gives you a better sense of what specifically do you hope to be gaining. Also, these could be things that you put in resumes or statements of purpose or letters of intent of skills that you feel that you have as you're building those skills. So hopefully you do feel like you're building these skills. If you want more direct instruction and help to build skills as well, I definitely encourage you to talk to professors and say, hey, I noticed you do really well at this. Can you give me some pointers before this assignment or just in general? So things like that. There's also different organizations or on campus. So I'm thinking like the Writing Center can help with writing. There's, I forget what it's called, the Career Center. It might not be Career Center. But they can help doing things like mock interviews. You can also find resources to help with presentation or working with groups on campus. So those kinds of things can also build your competency. But hopefully in these psych classes we are doing that as well, and we're trying to get you prepared for whatever workforce you're going into to be able to communicate and use psychology, use research, and use the things that you've learned in those kind of areas.